Audiences are not stupid. They see right through us. You need to speak to the mind, you need to speak to the heart, and you need to speak to the gut. I always tell people the story is you. Public speaking is a whole person game. Most people would rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy.
You are a superhero.
Movement is one thing that can really help get unstuck. I help leaders and experts communicate their ideas with confidence, with authenticity, and with impact. Hi, Tito.
Oh, hello. We
So sorry
made
to
it.
keep you waiting.
It's absolutely not your fault. I didn't even think about daylight savings.
Neither did I.
Nice to meet you.
And you. It's a long time coming.
Yeah, for sure. We've talked about this before, but I want to make sure I'm getting it right. Ioana.
Yes.
Ioana,
Well
perfect.
done.
How
I'm
about
impressed.
Bunaziwa? Is
Yeah.
that right?
Wow.
I remember
Where
our
did you?
conversation that you were
Yeah.
Romanian. So,
True. And I
yeah.
am in Romania as it happens. I'm
Oh, okay.
visiting. Yeah.
Gotcha. I got a couple more. Ce mai faci? Ce mai faci?
Mulțumesc bine.
Foarte bun.
Love it. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you
So
for that.
thank you so much for joining. We've been talking on Instagram for a few years now, I would say.
Couple of years, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that we just support each other as internet buddies. And it kind of came up naturally to just have this chat. So I really appreciate your time. It's really cool what you do. To explain to people who are listening what you do, you coach a lot of keynote speakers, leaders, athletes, basically help people spread their ideas by effective communication. But I was wondering, I would love to hear how you describe what you do. When people ask you, "Hey, Wana, what do you do? Tell me what you do." What do you usually like? What's your go-to?
Yeah. Thank you for that introduction. You actually got it exactly right.
Perfect.
And it's interesting you asked that question because just earlier today I was thinking about how it's been a bit awkward for me to answer that question because I tend to want to make everything really small and brush over it as quickly as possible so that we can talk about the other person.
Yeah.
And then the spotlight is off me, but I guess there's no escape now, is there? So So the way that I would define it would be to say that I help leaders and experts communicate their ideas with confidence, with authenticity, and with impact. So over the years, these three things have kind of risen to the surface in terms of the requests that I get and the types of things that people want to work on. And this is spreading over 46 nationalities that I've worked with. So I take it to be a pretty universal desire that
Yeah.
that people have in relation to their communication.
Yeah. I mean, I would consider that you are a superhero because that superpower, what I read somewhere, I don't know what the exact stat is, but like public speaking is up there, if not the number one fear. What's that? The word is like glossophobia, right?
Glossophobia, that's right. This bit by Jerry Seinfeld always comes to my mind when I think about this, where he says, if you're at a funeral, most people would rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy.
Yeah.
So
Is
about 75 to 85% of the population experiences glossophobia to some extent, right? It's
yeah,
a spectrum. Some people have more
right.
intense sensations than others.
Yeah, I mean, like the headline that I read was that public speaking is more feared than death itself. I wasn't sure if that was like actually the reality of it, but I can understand the
Yeah.
sentiment that I'm sure majority of people do not like to speak publicly.
Nope.
I know you don't like the spotlight always on you, but before we get into the actual craft of communicating and creative communication, I was curious because I was reading your about section on your website. I identify as an introvert, and it sounds like you do as well.
Right. Yeah.
And you also share that you tend to overthink a lot of times and be an anxious type. How did you get into this career with those things in mind?
Well, you know that expression falling upwards? It
Yeah,
was a
yeah,
bit like that.
yeah.
I've just had an immense amount of good fortune and the sense to make the decision to stay there.
Okay.
So when I was in high school, I went to this regional public speaking competition. I think I was about 15 or 16. And I wrote a story that I almost read out to the audience, but with a bit of kind of a poetic intonation and drama for effect.
Yeah.
And I got my first standing ovation and won that competition. And it was a real feel good moment for me as someone who did not have a huge social circle, was not one of the popular kids at that age. So it was a memory that stayed with me. And I hadn't actually thought about it actively until much later when I looked back and I thought, okay, where does this come from? Fast forward a few years, I was looking for a job while I was studying. I was in my second year in university. And it just so happened that I landed an interview with a language school. And they asked us to do a demo lesson. They did corporate communication for people who needed to speak better English for their job. So it was very often presentation skills, talking in meetings, pitching to clients, speaking to your company board, or things like that. So I got the job and they said, we have a project starting next week. If you want it, it's yours. I was 18 and a half at this point. So I just said yes because I needed to work. I wanted to be able to support myself in a different city from my hometown. So I said, okay, we'll give it a go. We'll see how it goes. So for the first 6 months in that job, I was horrified every morning when I had
Yeah.
to go out and teach. So I had, the nausea, the cold sweats, the trembling, you name it, I had it. And it dissipated over time. And then I got into, seeing that my trainees were actually experiencing very much similar things as I had. It was a pretty long process of research empirically, where I talked to them a lot about how they're experiencing stress around presenting and what it takes to make that, a little bit less intense or even maybe feel good while doing a presentation. So that's how it started, and now I'm really, really privileged to be working with absolutely incredible speakers. So I learn from my clients as much as they learn from me.
Wow. Yeah, that's so encouraging as there's a lot of people that I talk to who would consider themselves introverts. You would think that introverts shy away from this type of work
Mhm.
or this type of communication. And I mean, look at us. Us two are putting
Couple of
ourselves out.
introverts.
Yeah, putting ourselves out there. So there is this
Yeah.
energy of wanting to communicate and like this need to
Yes.
communicate. A bit interesting too, because there's also a difference with how it comes about. This like feel of almost survival. For myself, I moved around a lot as a kid. I was born in the Philippines. And then when I moved to the States, my vehicle to fit in was performance and being an artist and doing all these things. So it's almost like you gain the skills to communicate and present and perform,
Mhm.
and it's coming from almost a survival mechanism. Do you feel like that's how yours developed too, in the sense that you were didn't have the social circles at first, you got the standing ovation, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna build this skill in order to keep gaining acceptance?
Yeah, I don't think it was a conscious decision for me at first,
Yeah.
but it definitely imprinted into, what made me feel welcome and appreciated, and it did kind of get me to want to do more of that, so I
Yeah.
could get more of that, right? I can see in my clients and my speakers now that the opposite is also true in the sense that it does feel like a threat to our well-being when we're concerned about an audience judging us and
Mm.
possibly thinking that we're not up to par. So it does play both ways.
Yeah. So, like, can you speak more on that threat? Because it does, it's a weird feeling when you're on stage and you're worried about what people think. The body
Yeah.
takes this like threat feeling. What is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there are 2 points of view that I would like to share here. And one
Yeah.
is this one where we perceive social threats as an actual life and death threat, right?
Mm.
If we take it to the extreme, and then we go into fight, flight, freeze, the typical stress sequence, right? Depending on what is the predominant pattern for each of us.
Yeah.
And there's this other perspective where I find it much more empowering, based on Lisa Feldman Barrett's research. She's a neuroscientist and psychologist at Northeastern University. And she has this perspective of stress being the body rising up to a challenge.
Ooh.
So, whenever our nervous system expects that we'll need to use a lot of energy for something, it mobilizes all sorts of resources in the body, like glucose to the muscles, epinephrine, adrenaline, our heart rate speeds up, our breath becomes more shallow to get our body ready for a challenge.
Mm.
And the trick is the brain doesn't make the difference between a social challenge and a physical challenge. So
Sure.
the only way it knows how to react is to get us ready, right, to move. So that's why we get the tingly hands and feet and the butterflies in the stomach and the heart rate and all that. But if we look at it as just our body getting ready and our nervous system doing its job, I feel that there's a powerful reframe there, and we can begin to accept it and not fight it so hard. And in that acceptance, there's space to work with it.
Right. Yeah. It's just the body, almost like the autonomic nervous system. It just happens. And
That's it.
we don't have to overthink that. It's just what's happening, and it's just you're just getting ready to
Yeah.
perform.
It would be odd if it didn't do that,
Yeah,
right? Because
that's true.
then that would be a malfunction of our nervous system. Now, obviously, the question is how can we get our brain to understand that maybe this challenge is not so great?
Mm.
Maybe it doesn't need to mobilize so many of our resources. That's for me where the fine tuning can happen.
Do you think the difference between someone who would consider themselves naturally confident in public speaking or communication? I'm sure it's the repetition and the experience, but like you said, it's normal for the body to feel this way, even if they're not scared. They could be excited, like anxious and excitement, I believe, is the same feeling. Do you think it's
Very
just the
similar, yeah.
mindset of where they frame this body feeling, the threat? Is that the difference between someone who's maybe not as confident versus someone who is?
I think mindset is definitely a part of it. So the way that you're able to make sense of your experience also defines or shapes the experience. If I can think of, a day with absolutely nothing in my calendar, is that a boring day or is that a restful day? Right? It's the
Mm,
exact same thing.
right.
Same with speaking. That's part of it. There are people for whom cognitive control, so top down, is not so easy to do because the reaction in the body is too strong for that to happen.
Mm,
It's, what I call you can't control the mind with the mind. So if your body is responding too strongly for your mind to be able to take control, then what you need is, on the one hand, as you said, exposure and getting used to it so that you can learn from experience to experience that this is a safe situation and you can do it. And if something goes wrong, you're not going to die,
Yeah.
and so on, right? So even failure has value in the sense of learning that you can survive that.
Yeah.
And obviously, I want to kind of put an asterisk here because, yes, there are situations where maybe somebody's job depends on how they do in a presentation, or there are maybe startup founders for whom, a pitch can make or break their business. So
Yeah.
I won't, take anything away from that. These situations are absolutely real and they're high stakes and totally normal to feel stress in those moments. So exposure is one thing that can make it better. And then there are other strategies, kind of midterm and short-term strategies that speakers can look at and see what works for them in terms of behavior, what they can do weeks, days, minutes before a talk, in terms of how they manage their body. Sleep is an absolutely essential part of stress management.
Yeah.
Looking at the body's resources, when we're sleep deprived, the body is just in a constant state of stress, and
Yeah.
that just ups our baseline. So if we're starting from, a mode where we have a full body battery, we're much better able to cope with short-term acute stress. Whereas if we're sleep deprived and maybe we're not eating right and maybe we're dehydrated because we're not taking care of that, then it just makes the level of our stress starting point a lot higher than
Yeah.
if we kind of have all these things. I always say public speaking is a whole person game.
Yeah.
It's not about just having your notes and your slides. It's about how you manage yourself
Yeah.
on the whole.
When we think about it, it's a very obvious thing that if we can already pinpoint that a big part of the nerves comes from the body, then taking care of the body is like a really important
Exactly.
factor. So it's just like, okay, it's right there, but a lot of us miss that because we are in our brains, we are in our mind, not even
That's it.
thinking about the body, even though we know
Yep.
it is.
And then we wonder why the body is working against us.
Yeah. Yeah. When you were in that role, you said like the first 6 months, you were always anxious, nervous, and all that. What type of techniques at a young part of your career, what did
Mm.
you learn as you gained more confidence and as you were able to start reframing those things that you were just talking about? Like what worked for you at that time? Like what got you out of that state?
Right. So what I noticed was that if I would walk to my class, by the
Mm.
time I was there, I was already feeling a lot better. And I didn't know this
Mm.
at the time, but later I learned that movement is actually one of the best ways to release stress, because it allows the muscles to release the tension that's kind of stored in them, but also because when you walk or cycle, you create what is called optic flow. So when you see kind of images going past you as you move, right? Like when you're driving and you see the telegraph poles going past you on the motorway,
Yeah.
that part of the optical system is linked to our stress response, because back in the day, the way that we would get rid of danger would have been to run away or play dead, right? But
Yeah.
before you play dead, you try to run away. So if you're moving, it means you're escaping danger for our nervous system.
Whoa.
So whenever we're able to move a little bit, even just a 5 minute walk can work wonders. You've often seen people kind of pacing up and down, right, when they're stressed,
Yeah.
and it's just an instinctual response that we have. So that helped me
Would you
at the
say like
time.
moving in the physical plane, if you were just stationary and shaking out, I'm sure that helps, but would you say
Yeah.
like actually walking where your plane is moving, do you think that that's a better option?
Walking, they're different. So shaking is something you can do, of course, when you don't have the space to go for a
Mm,
walk or the time. um,
yeah.
and it is a bit of a more primal response. So if you've seen kind of animals after they've had a big scare, they tremble,
Mm,
and that's a way for all mammals to release really intense stress. And once you've done that, you can go to the next level, which is going for a walk.
okay.
But both are great, and actually I recommend movement whenever somebody feels like they're about to freeze on stage. And this is kind of a tip to use for during your talk, right? There are things you can do before, many of them, but during a talk, there are not so many. But movement is one thing that can really help get unstuck.
Oh,
So just a couple of steps, or using arms to open up the body a little bit. So it's not about, suddenly becoming very chaotic with your body.
yeah. Yeah.
That's not a good idea. But
It'd
if
be a
you
fun
can make it
video.
look, yeah,
Yeah.
if you can make it look a little bit like it's part of your story, part of what you're doing, um, getting the body unstuck gets the mind unstuck as well.
Wow. And do you find that the people that you're working with, if you're working with someone, I guess let's just walk through a little bit about your process when you're working with someone, whether it's somebody who's a professional speaker or just someone that's kind of right at this beginning spot of wanting to share their ideas. What are you analyzing when you first meet with someone and how you help them?
So I'll first want to understand what's important for that person in their content, but also in how they relate to speaking and to their audience. And so I'll do an assessment of the person's values, of their physical experience, their emotional experience while speaking. And more often than not, it is about how the person relates to the act of communicating. Maybe they see it as, a social threat situation. Maybe they see it as a transaction where they're supposed to get something, buy-in or respect or attention, whatever it might be,
Mm,
rather than they're supposed to give something, right? So share their expertise, or be a vehicle for the audience to learn something. There's that perspective. It can get, pretty personal pretty fast in
yeah.
that way, but it does lay the foundation for me and the client, the speaker, to be able to then look at what are the strategies that would serve them best. Because I can try, however many things, if they don't fit for that person, they're not going to work, they're not going to stick. So that's why I begin with these conversations first. And I work a lot with the what we call phenomenology in Gestalt. So the physical sensations that are happening even in the session as my speaker is describing a situation, for example. Those are very often clues to, what matters to them, what is difficult for them, where are maybe some blind spots that they might have, fears, imposter syndrome, all of these things tend to come
Wow.
up.
How much do you focus on like the physicality and the mental state while someone is presenting versus the actual content of the material itself? Like how involved are you in each kind of
Mm,
aspect of the presentation?
right. That has changed for me over time. And I started from a very content focused place
Okay.
and moved on to kind of add a delivery layer where I also looked at how people were expressing those ideas, how they were uttering the words. Now I'm looking at this kind of intra and interpersonal level. So how they relate to communication itself. I spend a bit more time here because it allows for a much faster process afterwards. So if I'm in a coaching process with someone end to end, let's say somebody wants to deliver a specific presentation, or they have a keynote coming up, or a TEDx type of talk, and they want to work with me, then we'll begin with what matters to them, the idea, why that's important, all of these things, trying to kind of select the core message out of all of the knowledge that the person wants to share. So my approach to content is the same as I approach packing my suitcase when I'm traveling. First, I take half my wardrobe out and think, okay, I would like to bring all of these things. Then I begin to put stuff back because I think, okay, do I really need this? No, it goes back on the shelf. Am I really going to use this? No, it goes back on the shelf. Same with people's content. They want to share everything.
Yes.
But especially if they're experts, they really want to explain like all the details, dive really deep.
A lot of dense material. Yeah.
Really dense, technical.
Yeah.
And that also very often comes from a need to justify themselves, to build up their authority, their credibility, to convince people that, look, I'm not a fraud. I know what I'm talking about. I've done all of this work. I'm so smart. I'm so hardworking.
Yeah.
Right? We all want to be appreciated for those things.
Yes.
So I want to normalize this because it's absolutely embedded in our nature for us to want that type of appreciation. But the audience doesn't want to look at half my wardrobe, right? They just want the essential things that are really necessary for that specific journey, which is that specific talk. I walk them through that, and that takes a couple of sessions, depending on the person and the topic. And then once that's done and everything is worded in, a way that's representative of my speaker and also simple and clear enough for their audience. And I want to say for their audience is important here because sometimes experts will talk to other experts and then they need to match that register. Sometimes they'll talk to non-experts, or if it's, founders and investors, again, you need to think, what does my audience care about? So once that's all done, then we'll look at how they deliver and whether they're congruent with their message. So does their body, does their voice tell the same story as their words? I always tell people the story is you. You are the first person who has to be the embodiment of that story. That's what will make you credible for your audience. If, for example, you watch people on mute, I'll do this exercise every now and then with my speakers, where we record them doing their presentation, and then we'll either only play the audio or only play the video, but without sound. And we'll check if the feeling we're getting from that experience matches what we're actually trying to project. And so often, it does not. I'm so excited to be here today. Right? And I've seen pain and suffering on people's faces while they were pitching. If you just switch off the audio, you'll see it, because it's really stressful, right?
Yeah.
And we're not always aware of what our body is doing, so we need to see it to get that feedback and begin to adjust.
Wow.
So that's part of the work as
Yeah.
well. And then, of course, I'll help them kind of manage themselves on the day, know how to prepare, what questions to ask of the organizer, how to manage their nerves, what to do if different things happen. We always kind of have plans B and C and D in case whatever things might go wrong.
Yeah.
So that's also part
I
of the
love I love
preparation.
a plan B, C, D, E. I mean, I'm that type to have like, okay, if plan A doesn't work, what's my route here? Um,
So necessary. Yeah. And
yeah,
it's what separates a pro from a near pro,
yeah,
right?
right.
Even people with a lot of experience, if they're not prepared for situations that are actually really common, like another speaker runs overtime and the organizer asks you to cut your stuff down to 5 minutes instead of 10,
Mm,
that's a huge difference. You need to have that in your back pocket,
yeah.
right?
Do you do say for the same type of content, do you create like alternate versions of the presentation, like say based on the audience, where you have a more technical group where you're speaking to an expert, to a more basic core message group, to investor group or
Yeah.
something like that? Is
Yeah.
that part
Yeah.
of the package that you work with clients on?
It depends, of course, how much time we have available.
Sure. Yeah.
And if that's part of the request, sometimes it will be a request just for a specific event with, like, a one time audience.
Mhm.
But if, for example, I am in a long term process with someone who wants to up their game in terms of their communication, that is one of the things we look at. And I think about it for my own content as well. When I'm speaking to different groups, I always try to speak their language, to use terminology that is familiar to them. I won't, for example, refer to how we are coded when I'm speaking to a group of artists,
Yeah.
right? I'll talk about maybe the harmonies of our, I don't know, different ways of relating to other people. Or
Sure. Yeah.
I'm making this up right now,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
you get the
Yeah.
you get the
You're
gist.
speaking
Yeah,
to the audience based on language that they can resonate with.
exactly,
That's an art.
exactly.
That's an art form. Like you are a true artist. Being able to communicate one way is one thing, but being able to understand who you're
Yes.
talking to is a completely different ballgame.
It's where presence really comes in. I define this, as an ability to be flexible and permeable to our environment. So this is where we're able to shift gears, not only from one audience to another, but if something happens in the room. I'll never forget, I had this teacher in my early days as a trainer of communication skills. I was in this course and had a teacher who said, teach the students, not the plan. And that
Mm,
just stuck with me 18 years back, 17 years back. And I'll never forget it because that's what it's all about.
yeah,
Be able to respond to what's happening right in front of you.
right.
If you see that your stuff is not landing, you need to be able to change that. But first, you need to be able to notice that it's not landing. And when we're stuck in our plan, that's when we're not able to see, any further than right here.
Yeah. I could see how useful having you around is because a lot of the times you're on stage fighting for your life, essentially. So
Yeah.
having a trusted expert that can review things with you, whether it's muting the audio and just watching body language or the opposite, so you're in the weeds, it's hard to see that kind of thing. I want to go back because you mentioned something about, people want to prove to others that they're experts. And you said
Mm-hmm.
something along the lines of you are the story. Is that what like you
Mm-hmm. That the story is you.
the story is you. Can you
Yeah.
expand on that a little bit? Like how does someone gain credibility and position of authority in a certain
Mm.
subject by making the story them rather than the data and the facts and all the technicals?
This is about two different types of trust. One is cognitive trust, and that comes from things like having sources for our data, being accurate, being, first of all, well prepared, looking, like we've done our work, like we're professional. And then there's an emotional type of trust, an affective trust, which is created while we connect and by being congruent with what we're communicating. For example, if I was right now talking in a really, really shaky voice and not making eye contact with you and, being really awkward, lots of ums and ahs, things like that, that would undermine my credibility as a speaking coach, right? I would not be
Sure.
walking the talk.
Sure.
The way that we're able to find that alignment between who we are, how we show up, and the work that we are wanting to do, that we're talking about, creates that effective trust, which is not always at the top of our awareness. And I'm speaking now from the perspective of the audience. If I'm in a room and somebody's doing a presentation or a keynote, I'm not thinking necessarily, oh, I don't trust this person because they're a little bit shaky. But before that thought even is formed, you feel the lack of trust.
Yeah.
Right? So it's pre-verbal. Then there's the warmth element. So all of these are kind of power elements, right? Accuracy, sounding confident, being composed, looking people in the eye. So even body language and vocal cues related to power. And then there's this warmth element that also contributes to effective trust, which is basically, am I able to show to my audience that I mean well for them? This is where, you want to think that it's not about you, it's about how you can be of service and how you can help and facilitate an experience for the people in the room. And it can come from specific words that somebody might use so long as they mean them. So I have a good friend who's a speaker who always refers to his audience as dears, darling people. And he really means it. Like, you can really hear it in his voice. And that's a fairly obvious way of being warm. But another one is through your intonation, through having open body language, through being physically close. For example, if you're on a big stage where that could be challenging, sometimes people tend to kind of stick to the podium or even behind the podium, or if they have a flip chart, then they'll go and they'll kind of like to be in that safe space of the flip chart, right? Be physically close to your people, come close to them, make eye contact with all the parts of the room, right? The eight type of thing.
Yeah.
So these small things like that can help to build that credibility on all the levels, because only cognitive trust is not enough to move people. And only effective trust, people will think, oh, he's a nice guy, but I'm not really sure that he can deliver. So you really need both to have the impact that you want.
Okay. So I've been thinking about this and I may be completely off. So you let me know if I'm on track here. I'm currently
Sure.
reading this book where there was a part of a chapter where he was talking about the limbic system and the neocortex. So the limbic system, for people who are listening, is considered maybe the older part of the brain, maybe just like your gut feeling, more intuition based type of thinking. And then the neocortex is where language is driven, where rationalization happens. As I was reading this, I was like, oh, okay. And rarely do those two things kind of communicate with each other. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe that's just how I'm understanding it. A little bit, slightly. Okay.
They do communicate quite a lot. They need to,
Okay,
because
perfect.
otherwise we wouldn't have freeze moments.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's
Otherwise
true.
we wouldn't have that shut off moment.
Gotcha. Okay, so my idea that could be completely wrong. um, Effective communication, the people who present very dynamically and the ones who inspire the most, I consider them like artists, poets. They are the ones that can communicate kind of right in between both worlds of the intuition and like the rational. Is there something there? Like, is there something
There's
where there's
something
like a
there.
bridge there?
Yes. I would call it not in between, but both.
Okay. Yeah.
Or even we can even add a third element. We could say you need to speak to the mind, you need to speak to the heart, and you need to speak to the gut.
Mm.
So to
Ooh,
have
okay.
this alignment between all three, where you have the argument that speaks to the mind and everybody, that's kind of your gateway. It's how you open the door into getting people to begin to trust you,
Yep.
right? Through a cognitive argument. Then you speak to the heart, you connect emotionally, and then you speak to the gut, which is where instinctively that's where people will connect through a shared need, a shared truth that doesn't need explaining too much because they've already decided they're going to trust you.
Mm.
And that's where, for example, voice and body language come in, because these are things that are processed beneath our conscious awareness, and that's where you can get the gut of your audience to
Yeah.
trust you.
Right. So heart and gut. So what did you say can touch the heart? Like, is it
This is
language?
this is the space of emotions.
Okay.
So things like storytelling, unpacking an emotional experience, for example. And I just want to be clear, I'm not advocating here for people to, lay out their traumatic experiences to relive in front of an audience. I
Yeah.
don't think anybody should do that. I don't consider that to be quality speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to name your experience and to be a guide for your audience, which requires that you, as the speaker, have already processed something for yourself, and you're able to guide the audience on the journey that you took. And
Sure.
maybe for you, it took, I don't know, years, decades, days, whatever.
Yeah.
But to be able to be a guide for the audience to make that journey in the space of a few minutes or even a few seconds.
Yeah. Because I mean,
So
there is such a
that's
thing
the
as like
heart.
a little bit of emotional manipulation too, right? Like sometimes people can sense
Absolutely.
that in the gut, like, I think they're trying to
Yep.
manipulate me a little bit.
Yep. Absolutely. Audiences are not stupid, right? They're really not stupid. They see right through us. And I'll also say it's not just manipulative, it's abusive to a
Mm.
certain level, because it turns the audience into your therapist
Mm.
when you begin to unpack all of the stuff that you're still making peace with. They didn't sign up for that you're doing that without their consent.
Wow. Yeah.
So
That's a great point.
everybody who thinks it's a good idea to share your deep, dark stories, do that once you've processed and integrated the experience, and you can use it to share learning.
Wow. Yes. And I'm sure those are things you identify when you're talking to people or you're coaching. Do
They
you ever
always
have
come
a
out.
situation where you're like, have you processed this yet? Like it seems like,
Mm-hmm.
wow. How's that
Yeah.
conversation?
I mean, I look at people with, my stance as a coach is to have positive regard and no judgment for my clients.
Hmm.
So, what I'll share with them is the reasons why I think that can be problematic. And I also try to stay curious around what drives them to want to share. And is that the way to get what they're trying to get? I mean, I try to stay in a space of respect always and compassion. And whenever I feel that I'm not being heard in that conversation, I will say that I'm not the coach for that person.
Mm.
So I respect people's decisions, and if they want to move forward with a conversation or a speech in that direction, good on them. They're free to do whatever they want to do. I don't feel that I can be a good coach for them in that particular situation. If they're open to working with the material that they have that involves all sorts of other things, and if they're open to seeing what part of this would be suitable to my audience so that it's of service to my audience, then, I'm happy to stay in that relationship and to work side by side with them.
Yeah.
But I have occasionally said no when I didn't feel like I was the right person for the work. And I have also asked people if they would be open to working in tandem with a therapist.
Oh,
So
okay.
as we were doing the work, where the person might need extra support that I am not trained to give, and I knew that it would be necessary.
Wow, that requires a lot of self-awareness of, okay, this is my expertise here. I think we need to involve other professionals to help you with your
Yes.
goals.
I mean, as a certified coach, it's part of my code of ethics.
Yeah,
So I am required by ICF and the profession to have this conversation with my clients. So
sure.
I always have it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Ultimately, the goal is to be able to have your clients and the people that you're working with to feel as authentically them as possible. And also for the audience to have this authentic connection to them. You mentioned while we were chatting kind of offline that authenticity is something that you're working on all the time. Where are you at in that journey in trying to discover authenticity with people? Because that's such a huge aspect of this whole thing. That's like the ultimate goal, right? Is we just want to be
Yeah.
ourselves without feeling like we're manipulating or abusing the people we're communicating to. How do we get to that middle ground there where you're authentically you?
Mm. Yeah, I have declared this year as the year of the self.
Mm,
In my research around what does it mean to be myself, to speak like myself, to show up like myself in any communication situation. So I'm very much in learner mode at the moment, and I'm reading a lot. I'm asking all of my clients, what is this for you? When do you feel most like yourself? How do you define yourself? What are the parts that make you, you? So it's a conversation that I'm constantly having with people. I'm curious how you would answer, by the way.
ooh, about which part? What makes me feel like me?
What would be your definition of what makes you, you?
This, I guess it'd be, I'd answer similarly to you in that, like, I've been on a journey to trying to find myself authentically. Because as I've
Mm,
mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, this perfect circular moment here, I've always been in a state of performance externally,
mhm.
in that, I started off as a musician. Like that was kind of my first creative outlet was music. And I
Nice.
found that performance was, like I said, a way for me to belong. As I moved around in different places, it was my way to make friends. As I get older, I'm now like, okay, was I just trying to be liked? Was that really me? You know?
Yeah.
And I think I'm coming to a place now where music is still a very complex relationship at the moment, but my
Mhm.
creative work has converted itself, the energy, into this craft talk scenario. And I feel closer. I feel closer in when I'm having a conversation with you. It's truly me being curious about
Mhm.
what does Ioana think about authenticity?
Yeah.
Like, I love knowing that you're introverted, but you're still putting yourself out there because this is what we do. Like, this is what we're doing. We're trying to communicate really important things, even though we're scared and anxious and all that stuff. So, I don't know
Yeah.
if that answers your question. I'm getting closer.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I take from it is, there's a part that's just you,
Hmm.
the creativity that comes from a place inside, and then there's a part of your definition of you that becomes concrete when you mirror yourself in other people.
Yeah.
And that's a process that most of us go through. So all of these elements contribute to our identity. I, for example, lost my ID recently, so
Mm.
I've had to get a new one reissued. It was a whole thing. But I noticed that this little piece of paper was a part of what defined my identity, which
Mm.
I had never thought about before.
Wow. In what way?
So our artifacts, well, for example, it limited how I could travel. And travel is a big part of how I live. So it's also something I identify with to an extent, right? The way we dress, our values, our passions, our interests, whether we have a family, our nationality, all of these things contribute to how we look at ourselves and how we show up. And a conversation I have very often with speakers is, what part of you do you want to show?
Mm.
Because it's okay to not show all of us. And sometimes it's necessary. And for some audiences, it's respectful to not show all of us, right? And if maybe I'm somebody who really likes to use a lot of swear words and slang, and that's a part of my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking to, I don't know, 5-year-old kids, right?
Yeah.
That would not be appropriate for my audience. So that's a part
Yeah.
of myself that I need to park away for a little while and bring up other parts of me. So
Yeah.
it's about having that range and that flexibility to work with all of who we are and not just get stuck into a persona. And when you talk about public speaking, that happens a lot because we think that there's a speaker's persona that we need to step into. And you used the word dynamic earlier. And I get that you did that because that's what a lot of us kind of think about on default mode when we think, oh, a good speaker
Sure.
has
Right.
high energy and
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
you know, but I've worked with speakers who are quiet and tiny, and
Mm.
it's so powerful to see a quiet person on a big stage
Mm.
that can hold that quiet. It's so moving, and it allows the audience to experience different ways of being, which I think is part of what makes speaking so great.
Wow.
Because if we were all going to be, shaped in the same mold, then we would all be, I don't know, Tony Robbinses. And
Right.
what would that world look like?
Yeah. That is a great point in that the default is for you to be a good speaker, you're like outwardly moving around all the time, but there are powerful ways in which silence and quiet also make, I would argue, maybe bigger impact at
Mm-hmm.
times.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
Absolutely. It all depends on the purpose of that conversation. And I'm saying conversation, and I mean speech, pitch, presentation, whatever. It's a conversation with the audience.
You have an amazing sense of self-awareness. I feel like
Work in progress, Tito. Work in progress.
no, but it's I mean, even as
Thank you.
someone, you're welcome. I mean, that's just what I'm observing. And in general, speaking and communication, self-awareness is key. If you don't
Yeah.
even know the type of audience or the type of conversation that you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
accomplish,
Yeah.
then what are you doing? Having a self-awareness, which also unlocks so many different aspects of just being a human. Having self-awareness doesn't just improve your speech or your keynote presentation. It allows you to kindly even ask me, the host of this podcast, what do you think about, like I clocked that. I read that and I was like, oh wow, she's really good at reading the room, which is everything.
Try to learn from everyone. So this was an
Yeah.
opportunity. I didn't want to miss it.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess to turn it back on you, do you feel at home in your body as you do this type of work? Or do you feel like,
Yeah,
oh, this is still like I'm still trying to figure myself out?
I do now, and I'm also very quickly aware when there's some tension in my body. I'll notice that because I have a lot of practice in being in touch with my physical sensations through the coaching work that I do, through years of therapy, and all of these things that I've tried to do to understand myself better, basically. So I have that practice, and it's always a cue for me when I notice some tension. It's very often for me either in my back or in my stomach, or maybe I notice that, I don't know, my hands can be a little bit shaky if I'm nervous. So that happens still today, every
Sure.
now and then. It's a cue for me to come back into the present. I know that when something like that happens, I'm either in the future or in the past, and noticing my body brings me back to here and now. And it's something I try to teach my speakers to do as well, to
Yeah.
notice themselves and to come back through
Right.
that.
Still always self-awareness, right? Like that awareness is such
Yeah.
a massive part. Is there anything that specifically you feel like you're wanting to improve on or like trying to get better at?
There are a couple of things I could say here. One is I'm always working on my ability to be a clean mirror for my clients. So, not to filter things through my own judgment or my own experience, but to be able to stay curious to what something means for them or how it feels for them, and not to assume that I know. So that takes constant practice. I don't think it's ever finished. And in terms of speaking, yeah, I'm always watching myself, my recordings, and taking notes and thinking, oh, I could fine tune this thing here. I was going a bit too long there. And noticing things that I think I do well also, because I learn from that too. More of the good stuff, right? So
Yeah.
I'm trying to stay in the learner's shoes as much as I can. Every now and then I think, okay, I've got this. I don't have to work so hard.
Yeah.
And that's when it goes wrong. As
No
soon as
worries,
my
I got
ego
this. Yeah.
kicks in, that's right. I've done this.
Yeah.
And it's never a disaster, but I can always see how I could have done better if I had put a bit more effort into my preparation. And that can just mean mental preparation, or it can mean writing some stuff down. Even after I've got 17 years as a trainer and a coach and speaking in front of people, even after all this time, I still feel the need to be prepared.
Yeah.
It makes a difference for me. Yeah.
Did it bother you that when we were coordinating, I wouldn't give you everything that we were going to talk about?
It didn't bother me, but it did add an extra level of challenge. I took it as, okay, great. This is an opportunity for me. I'm going to look at it that way. But
Yeah.
yeah, there was a part of me that would have been comforted to have a couple of pointers. I'm glad that you didn't, because this was so much fun.
Yeah, you absolutely nailed it. And the only reason why, right when you said, "What do you want to talk about?" I was like, "Oh, she's exactly like me." And I sent you a couple ideas of what we
Mm-hmm.
could have talked about when I first started this podcast, which it was a important part that I needed to do was I would type word for word what I was going to ask and where I wanted the conversation to go. That was part of the process, right? In like kind of learning how I do this thing. And it was great, but it was just so much on my mental load that
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't enjoy the conversation and the back and forth. Whenever I can, I try to give little generic answers of what we could talk about, but I am always confident that my guest is like, the story is you. I'm not worried that you're not going to be able to present yourself well and be able to explain your experience, especially with you as someone that has such credibility in what you do. So you nailed it. I'm sorry if I
Thanks,
put you in a
Tudor.
little bit
I
of a
appreciate that.
stressful situation.
No, it was great, and I think this is a great kind of sharing backstage stuff for our listeners
Yeah.
and viewers, because I will say I prepared for this. I
Yeah.
took notes. I thought, what are the things that are important for me to communicate? I wrote them down. I didn't
Mhm.
know what you were going to ask, but I could make an educated guess. And then I also checked in with myself, and I thought, okay, what's an important message that I want to
Mhm.
pass on? even if you don't have questions for
Yeah.
an interview, you can still prepare, and you
Yes,
should.
for sure. And
So,
I'll show you. I've limited myself to a post-it note.
oh, love it.
So like,
Can I have a picture of that?
yeah,
That
I'll
is
send it.
so
I
cool.
also have, I cheated and I got two this time because I have Bunaziwa, I have Fartebun,
Fantastic.
Multimisk.
Kupletero.
Yeah,
Love
that's so
it.
awesome. Wow, this was
Yeah,
really fun. I mean, I can't believe like we've already been talking this long. So if you're ever down, I would love to do a part two. We can talk about eustress. That's we can
absolutely.
preview eustress at some point in the future.
Yeah.
But Ioana, I just want to thank you so much for your generosity, and like I can't wait to cut these up into the clips, and also for people to listen
Yeah.
to the whole thing, because I think it's applicable to all parts of life.
I really appreciate that, Tito, and I appreciate the invitation. This was a fantastic Saturday afternoon for me.
Yeah, it was perfect. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Craft Talk. We'll catch you next time. Bye.